The Sinking City is weird, in every sense of the word. To quote my new favourite game developer,
"It's spooky."
The latest title from Frogwares very openly wears its Lovecraftian inspirations not just on its sleeve, but all the way up its long tentacles. The game is a third-person open-world investigative adventure with puzzle-solving and detective mechanics, as well as some basic shooting combat. The star of this 1920s noir mystery is Charles Reed, an ex-Navy sailor turned private investigator searching for an answer to the monstrous visions he can't escape. Reed's visions have led him to the town of Oakmont, Massachusetts, a town devastated by a peculiar and seemingly supernatural flood that has left them isolated and nearly unreachable. The streets are soaked with fish guts and whale carcasses are everywhere, along with grotesque creatures fresh from the Cthulhu mythos that want your sanity just as much as they want your flesh. Through his investigation, Reed encounters several strange and morally ambiguous individuals, most of whom are very well voiced, giving each of them a real sense of character and individuality. Reed himself is clearly a troubled character, but I'm not sure if it's actually him that's interesting or just his nightmarish visions. A personal favourite of mine is Robert Throgmorton, a wealthy aristocrat and head of the Throgmorton family. Oh, and did I mention he looks like he's cosplaying for Donkey Kong's wedding? He is sinister and powerful, but his intelligence and influence are essential assets to Reed. As well as weird ape men, you'll meet the fish-faced Innsmouthers. These two races, as well as the rest of the more conventional-looking humans, bitterly hate each other. These racial prejudices form the foundations of much of the game's investigative mechanics and lore. The game uses something familiar to Sherlock fans known as the Mind Palace.
Get out, I need to go to my Mind Palace.
The what?
This allows the player to make deductions based on the information they've uncovered. Unfortunately, this lacks some of the depth I was expecting, and deductions can easily be cheesed by simply selecting everything until something matches up, rather than actually having to use your brain. The lack of breadcrumbing for the investigation itself is great for immersion, but the Mind Palace isn't quite as deep as the game thinks it is. That being said, once several deductions are made during the case, you will eventually come to a conclusion, which is where things get really interesting. These usually go one of about two ways. The guy did a bad thing and is in the wrong, or the guy did a bad thing but for a good reason. Just like the game's characters, these are all morally grey and there is no clear right answer. Do you turn in the criminal to meet his grisly fate, or do you see things from his perspective and let him go free? Coming to these conclusions then informs how the case plays out and is by far the game's greatest strength, testing the player's sanity and morality as much as Reed's. Despite the deductions being easy to come to even without bending the system, the game actually isn't very good at telling you what to do or how things work. But this is both a blessing and a curse. Not knowing where to go next forces you to be a detective, because the game doesn't pin the next location on the map for you. Instead, you have to read your clues and mark your next destination yourself, and then figure things out from there. The bad thing is that it isn't well tutorialized and doesn't really explain how things work, such as the archives. I didn't even fully realize that crafting and level progression were actually a thing for the first couple of hours. When the game's hands-off attitude works, it helps add to the immersion of being a detective and solving the puzzle, but when it doesn't, it becomes a massive barrier to reaching the next clue and progressing the story. While the game does an excellent job of creating an authentic Lovecraftian atmosphere, the game struggles when it comes to some of its mechanics and gameplay. The game is a detective adventure first and a shooter second or even third, and you can really tell. Now, that's not going to be the end of the world for existing fans of Frogwares' Sherlock Holmes games, but it must be said that the shooting here just isn't good. The guns lack any real power or impact on their targets and don't sound particularly great or handle well, which is odd considering Reed's military backstory. Once you unlock guns like the shotgun later in the story, things get a bit better, but that's mainly because it's much more powerful, so you can get through enemy encounters faster. However, the ability to craft bullets and items such as traps, grenades, or first aid kits in the inventory menu really is a blessing. This means that the tension of running out of ammo in a fight is still there, but doesn't become too frustrating when paired with the dodgy shooting. There are parts of the world which are quarantined as infestation zones, and they are filled with enemies. Entering these spots, even for a few seconds, massively ramps up the tension as a bunch of monsters come hurtling towards you and your damaged psyche. When it comes to what you're shooting, there is a Resident Evil feel to these encounters. The horrific look, sound design, and musical cues of these creatures really adds to the unpleasant and unsettling atmosphere that something very wrong is happening in Oakmont. The music is fairly minimal and occurs mostly in the background, but constantly left me feeling like The music warps and distorts along with Reed's sanity, which always makes things feel ill at ease. The game does a great job of integrating the lore of the monsters and the wider world into the gameplay itself, with side investigations unveiling what these things are called and their behaviours, rather than overtly telling you. Another way the gameplay is linked to the lore is with Reed's retrocognition and mind's eye abilities. Due to his fractured mental state, Reed has an extra sense, like most modern games. Most games have a see-through walls button just for the sake of it, but the Sinking City uses this as part of the character's madness, and overuse of it will damage his sanity. As Reed's sanity meter plummets from using this ability or seeing horrendous creatures in the world, his visions begin to reappear in front of him and apparitions form to attack him. When he starts to lose his mind in combat, the encounters become extra stressful and make you want to end them even faster. Reed can also use his supernatural abilities to reconstruct crime scenes and look directly into the past. You then have to figure out the correct order of events to progress, and these moments are some of the game's strongest qualities. Unfortunately, some of the game's biggest drawbacks are the performance issues. I played on the vanilla PS4 and had regular frame rate issues, likely due to the heavy use of environmental effects like rain and fog. Just like British summertime, it never stops raining. This miserable weather absolutely complements and enhances that Lovecraftian feel. It's just a shame that the game's performance suffers because of it. Most NPCs in the game don't have any voice acting, and what little they do have is usually repeated, so they just wander around aimlessly and frequently disappear and then reappear. For a world that so authentically realizes what they were trying to achieve when it comes to the visuals, it's disappointing that the NPCs are just sort of there. That being said, this does add a strange otherworldly vibe to them, which could be what they were going for. To be honest, that could be said for most of the glitches in the game. It all makes the world seem weird and off-putting, but somehow I don't think that was the plan. That overall unnerving feel is best captured by an underwater segment, where through the murky water you see a colossal squid-like creature swim past as your sanity bar sinks 20,000 leagues under the sea. I also can't help but wonder that perhaps this game shouldn't have been a fully open world. There's a lot of backtracking to old areas for different investigations, and lots of all but empty buildings with repeated interiors. Some buildings even have extra rooms hidden behind doors because these were recycled from another location which did have something occupying that space. That being said, if this was a linear game, then the investigation mechanics of having to figure out where to go simply wouldn't work. So I guess some tighter open world design and more enterable and varied environments would actually give me a reason to explore rather than just rushing from A to B. That journey of getting from A to B can also be a pain because, as you may have gleaned from the title, the city is sinking. This makes much of the world only traversable by boat, and as I've said before, the quality of traversal systems can make or break an open world game. While it is clearly a very different game to Sony Santa Monica's God of War, especially in terms of budget, I learned to love those boat trips, but here they just get in the way of all the good stuff. Something as simple as having Reed talk to himself about the case or his visions would really help these journeys because you will be doing a lot of them. Luckily though, these frequent boat trips are mercifully short. There really is a lot to like in the Sinking City for people who are fans of all things Cthulhu and H.P. Lovecraft. Themes of sadness and fractured sanity? Check. Disgusting nautical monstrosities and cosmic horror? Check. Thick atmosphere and macabre stories? Check. The story itself is a dark noir tale spliced together with these classic Lovecraftian elements to make something morbidly satisfying and compelling, albeit frustrating to unravel at times. If you're looking for a flashy detective action game where you kill monsters all day, then you're in the wrong place. If you want some classic cosmic horror with a compelling investigation of a man's vision sending him to insanity and why horrible things are happening in the city, then look no further. Welcome to Oakmont, newcomer.